All right, everybody, welcome in. Today's deep dive, leadership. Specifically, we're going to figure out how to really manage all those different personalities, work styles, the whole shebang that we find on our teams. And lucky for us, we've got a fascinating presentation to dig into. It's all about ditching those half-baked leadership approaches and really perfecting our recipe, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We're talking fully baked leadership here, ready to tackle any challenge. And from what I've seen, this presentation has some really interesting ideas.
I'm all about interesting. So no more cookie cutter leadership, got it. Where do we even begin with this recipe?
Well, the presentation kicks off with not one, but two different models to help us understand leadership styles. And get this, they come with graphs.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. You had me at grass. Let's hear it.
So the first one, right, it lays out all these different leadership styles on a graph, charts them against trust and performance. They've got toxic, disengaged, accommodating, and of course, the one everyone's aiming for, high trust, high performance.
Toxic leadership. Yikes. That sounds like a recipe for disaster for sure. And I'm guessing disengaged isn't doing anyone any favors either.
Not at all. Picture this.
Hmm.
You've got that micromanaging boss, the one who just doesn't trust their team. Classic example of toxic leadership, at least according to this model. Now, on the flip side, think about that awesome project you worked on where everyone was bouncing ideas around, felt empowered, really took ownership. Boom, that's your high trust, high performance environment right there.
Okay, those examples really paint a picture, make those styles really hit home. There was another model too, right? Something about different leadership behaviors.
You got it. The presentation then introduces this thing called the SLII model, which stands for situational leadership. Now, this one, it's all about how much support versus direction a leader's putting out there. Just like the first model, they use a handy graph to visualize the different combinations of these behaviors.
Okay, so we've got two separate models here. One focused on trust and performance, the other on support and direction. Are they even baking the same cake at this point?
That's the beauty of it. They are. Both models, at their core, are tackling the same fundamental leadership puzzle. We're talking about finding that sweet spot, that perfect balance between focusing on your people and the task at hand.
It's like finding the right balance of ingredients, right? Too much flour and your cake is dry, too much sugar and it's all sweetness and no substance.
Exactly. And just like a skilled baker adjusts their recipe based on the ingredients they're using, a good leader does the same. They adapt their approach based on who they're leading and what needs to get done.
So we're not picking one model over the other, right? It's more like understanding how they work together, two
Yep.
pieces of the same puzzle. But how do we actually use this? I bet our listeners are ready to fire up their ovens and get to baking with some real-world applications here.
You're reading my
Yeah.
mind. And the presentation delivers, don't worry. It takes those two models we talked about, the trust performance and the support direction, and it blends them like magic into one actionable framework.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. A framework sounds way more practical than just a couple of graphs, something I can actually use. Day-to-day leadership.
Picture this, a four-quadrant graph.
Ooh, I like visuals.
Each quadrant, it represents a different combo of those key ingredients we've been talking about. You've got your high or low trust and your high or low performance. You can actually map out where each person on your team fits on this thing.
Makes sense, like a diagnostic tool for your team. But knowing where someone sits on a graph, that's only helpful if you know what to do with that info, right?
Exactly. That's where this framework really shines. It goes beyond just identifying and gives you specific actions tailored to each quadrant.
All right, now we're talking. Give me an example. What kind of actions are we talking here?
Well, instead of just those basic quadrant labels, the presentation simplifies it even further. Four clear categories: increase supporting behavior, increase directing behavior, increase both, and empower.
I like it. Concise, actionable. So, say someone falls into that increased supporting behavior quadrant, maybe a bit disengaged. What's the presentation recommend, action-wise, for that?
This is where it gets really interesting. One suggestion, they say organize more social events, team building stuff, sounds simple, but they really emphasize the importance of those connections, building trust and all that for a high-performing team.
Yeah, that tracks, especially in a disengaged situation, low trust. Probably could use some team bonding for sure.
Yeah.
What about empower? That seems right up our listeners' alley, wanting their teams to grow and all.
It totally is. For folks in the empower quadrant, those rock star high performers with high trust, they say give them more autonomy. Put them in charge of their own projects, even their own teams, if it makes sense.
Plays to their strengths, lets them shine. I sense a but coming, though. This framework is great, don't get me wrong, but it's not like some magic wand, right? People are complex. You can't just categorize them and expect everything to fall into place.
You're absolutely right. And to be fair, the presentation acknowledges that. It emphasizes that this framework, it's a starting point, you know? You recognize the patterns, but then it's up to you, the leader, to actually adapt it and adjust based on the individual.
So it's like you've got your map, but you still got to pay attention to the terrain, maybe ask for directions every now and then.
Exactly. Be present, see how your team reacts to your leadership, and be ready to adapt on the fly. Remember that exercise from the presentation, writing down each team member's name under their quadrant.
Yeah, that seems super useful getting down to brass tacks.
It gets better. They suggest taking it even further. Under each name, jot down specific, totally tailored actions you can take based on where they land.
So not just Sarah empower, but have Sarah lead the client presentation next week or give her more decision-making power, stuff like that.
Bingo! Turn those big picture categories into a to-do list, a personalized leadership game plan for each person on the team.
Okay, I love how practical this is. Hold on, though. We haven't touched on those toxic team members, those folks stuck in the low-trust, high-performance zone. How does this framework handle those trickier situations?
Good point. That's where it can get a little complicated. The presentation admits that sometimes more support or direction, it just ain't enough. You need a more, nuanced approach.
Because sometimes it's not about, a lack of support or direction, right? It's something deeper, maybe about the person or how they fit in with the team overall.
Exactly. And in those cases, they suggest thinking about things like, could they move to a different team? Do they need extra training, coaching maybe? Or, and I know this is a tough one, but sometimes, gotta part ways.
Whoa, okay, real talk, but important. Can't have a healthy, high-performing team if you're holding on to those toxic dynamics.
100%. And that's why this framework is so valuable. It's a way to step back, assess your team, and make smart choices about how to best support everyone, even when it's hard.
It's not just about putting people in boxes. It's about using those categories to take action, build a stronger, tighter, and, yeah, ultimately more successful team.
Exactly. Leadership isn't about having every single answer. It's about being flexible, being willing to learn, and being committed to an environment where everyone can, thrive.
This has been such an insightful deep dive, seriously. We've given our listeners a ton to think about: practical models, actionable steps, even some, like you said, real talk for those tough situations.
And I hope they're walking away feeling ready to put it all into practice. Time to bake their own recipe for leadership success.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, happy leading, everyone.